There's a god in Greek mythology who committed his first crime on the day he was born. Not as a child learning wrong from right, not as a teenager testing boundaries, but as an infant, hours old, who climbed out of his cradle, walked out of the cave where his mother had given birth, and immediately decided to steal his brother's sacred cattle. He was clever enough to make the cattle walk backward so their tracks would confuse anyone trying to follow them. He was creative enough to invent the lyre from a tortoise shell and some sheep gut while he was at it. And he was audacious enough, when caught by his furious older brother Apollo, to lie directly to his face with such charm and skill that even the god of truth couldn't stay angry. His name was Hermes, and from that first day of existence, he understood something that would define him forever. The rules don't apply if you're clever enough to break them without getting caught. And if you do get caught, charm and wit can turn punishment into reward, accusation into laughter, theft into gift. Hermes was the trickster, the messenger, the god of boundaries and travelers and thieves and commerce and lies, and every liminal space where one thing transforms into another. He was the only god who could move freely between Olympus, Earth, and the underworld. The only one trusted by Zeus to carry messages because he was too useful to punish and too charming to hate. The only one who understood that power isn't just about strength or wisdom or authority. Sometimes power is about knowing when to break the rules, when to bend the truth, when to transform disaster into opportunity through sheer audacity. This is the story of the god who played everyone and somehow made them love him for it. Let's start with that first day, because it reveals everything about who Hermes was and would always be. He was born in a cave on Mount Selene to Maia, one of the Pleiades, a relatively minor nymph who'd caught Zeus's attention long enough to get pregnant, but not long enough to secure any protection or status. Hermes was born at dawn. By midday, he'd invented the lyre. By evening, he'd stolen 50 of Apollo's sacred cattle. This wasn't a child making mistakes or testing limits. This was a god who emerged into existence fully formed in terms of personality and priorities, who understood immediately that the world was full of opportunities for someone clever enough to seize them, who recognized that having nothing meant you had nothing to lose and everything to gain through audacity. He was born with nothing. No grand prophecies, no cosmic destiny, no special claim to power or authority, just cleverness and charm and the absolute certainty that those qualities, properly applied, could take him anywhere he wanted to go. The cattle theft is perfect. Apollo's cattle were sacred, guarded, clearly marked as belonging to one of the most powerful gods in the pantheon. Stealing them wasn't just crime, it was blasphemy. But Hermes, hours old, didn't care about blasphemy. He cared about proving himself, about having something of value, about demonstrating that even a newborn god with no reputation and no domain could outwit someone as established as Apollo. He drove the cattle backwards so their tracks pointed in the wrong direction. He made shoes for himself out of bark so his own footprints wouldn't be human-shaped. He hid the cattle in a cave, sacrificed 2 of them to the gods, and divided the meat into 12 portions for the 12 Olympians, cleverly including himself in that count, even though he hadn't been officially recognized as an Olympian yet. It was a heist and a declaration simultaneously. I'm here, I'm clever, I belong among you. Apollo tracked him down, of course. Apollo was the god of prophecy and truth. He had resources that a newborn trickster couldn't evade forever. And when Apollo found Hermes in his cradle, when he accused the infant of theft, Hermes lied. Directly. Shamelessly, with wide, innocent eyes and the perfect pitch of wounded disbelief. How could I steal your cattle? Look at me. I'm a baby. I was just born. I can barely walk. Do I look like a cattle thief to you? And he said it so convincingly, with such charm, with such perfect manipulation of Apollo's expectations, that for a moment, Apollo actually doubted himself. But Apollo knew the truth. He dragged Hermes before Zeus to demand justice, to demand punishment, to demand that this infant criminal be made to return what he'd stolen and face consequences for his crime. Zeus looked at his newborn son, looked at Apollo, furious and righteous, looked at Hermes, still lying with cherubic innocence. And Zeus laughed, actually laughed, because he recognized something in Hermes that he appreciated, something that reminded him of his own cunning and trickery, something that would be useful. He ordered Hermes to return the cattle, but then Hermes pulled out the lyre he'd invented, the instrument made from tortoise shell and sheep gut, and played. And the music was so beautiful, so innovative, so unprecedented that Apollo, god of music himself, was transfixed. Hermes offered the lyre as a gift, a trade, the cattle for the instrument. And Apollo, despite having been lied to, despite having been the victim of theft, despite having every right to demand punishment, accepted. He took the lyre, he forgave Hermes, and he became, improbably, the infant trickster's first and most important ally. Think about what just happened in that story. Hermes committed a crime, got caught, lied about it, and not only avoided punishment but came out ahead, turning theft into trade, transforming criminality into creativity, making his victim grateful for the interaction. That's not just luck, that's a particular kind of genius, the ability to read people, to understand what they want, to offer them something valuable enough that they forget about being angry. Hermes understood Apollo wanted the lyre more than he wanted justice, understood that novelty and beauty could overcome righteousness, understood that the key to getting away with anything is making sure everyone involved benefits enough that they don't want to pursue consequences. It's manipulation, yes, but it's manipulation so skillful, so mutually beneficial, so ultimately positive in its outcomes that it stops being purely exploitative and becomes something else. The art of the deal. The transformation of zero-sum conflict into positive-sum collaboration. Zeus recognized Hermes' value immediately, made him the messenger of the gods, the one who would carry communications between Olympus and Earth, between gods and mortals, even between the living world and the underworld. It was a position of trust and importance, and Zeus gave it to a god whose first act was theft and whose defining characteristic was willingness to lie. Why? Because Zeus understood that a good messenger isn't just someone who delivers information accurately. It's someone who can navigate complex social situations, who can smooth over conflicts, who can take a difficult message and deliver it in a way that minimizes offense. Someone who understands that truth is often less important than perception, that how you say something matters more than what you're saying, that diplomacy is just another word for strategic dishonesty. Hermes was perfect for the job, and he performed it flawlessly for eternity, carrying Zeus's decrees and threats and promises across the cosmos, always knowing exactly how to frame the message so recipients would respond the way Zeus wanted. But Hermes wasn't just Zeus's errand boy. He was the god of boundaries, of thresholds, of the spaces between. His Hermes, stone pillars marking borders and crossroads, stood throughout Greece. They were often phallic, marking Hermes' association with fertility and generation, but more importantly, they marked transition points, where one territory became another, where roads intersected, where travelers had to choose which path to take. Hermes was the god of those moments of choice and change, the god of crossing from one state to another, from city to wilderness, from life to death, from truth to lie, from one identity to another. He lived in the in-between spaces, the liminal zones where normal rules didn't fully apply, and that's where he thrived, in the gray areas, in the moments of uncertainty, in the spaces where transformation happened. He was the god of travelers, which meant he was also the god of thieves, because travelers and thieves are fundamentally similar. Both are people in motion, both exist temporarily outside the normal social structures that govern settled communities, both survive by being adaptable and quick-thinking and opportunistic. Hermes protected people on journeys, helped them navigate unfamiliar territory, guided them to safe harbors. But he also protected pickpockets and con artists and everyone who made their living through cunning rather than honest labor. He didn't judge, didn't moralize, didn't care whether you were traveling for noble purposes or criminal ones. You were in motion, in transition, in his domain, and he'd help you if you asked, if you honored him, if you recognized that movement itself was sacred and that those who facilitated movement deserved respect. Hermes was also the god of commerce, of trade, of the exchange that makes both parties richer. And there's something profound in making the same god responsible for theft and for legitimate business, because what's the difference really? Both involve taking something from someone else and giving them something in return. The difference is just whether the exchange is voluntary and whether both parties feel they benefited. But the underlying principle is the same. Value is created through exchange, through movement of goods and ideas, through the transformation of one person's surplus into another person's necessity. Hermes understood commerce at a fundamental level that other gods didn't. Zeus had power, Athena had wisdom, but Hermes understood negotiation, understood that everything is for sale if the price is right, understood that the key to prosperity isn't hoarding what you have, but finding ways to exchange it for what you need. He was the patron of merchants and traders and everyone who understood that wealth comes from circulation, not accumulation. But let's talk about the lies, because Hermes was fundamentally the god of deception, of clever words, of the gap between what is and what appears to be. He could lie to anyone, god or mortal, it didn't matter. He lied to Apollo on the day he was born. He lied to facilitate Zeus's affairs, helping his father sneak around, covering his tracks, creating alibis and distractions so Hera wouldn't discover the latest infidelity. He lied to Argus, the hundred-eyed giant, telling stories until all 100 eyes closed in sleep, so Hermes could kill him and free Io, one of Zeus's lovers. He lied casually, professionally, creatively, transforming deception into an art form. And the Greeks didn't condemn him for it. They celebrated it, because Hermes' lies weren't malicious, they were instrumental. They served purposes, they achieved goals, they made things happen that needed to happen but couldn't happen through straightforward truth. This reveals something important about Greek ethics. They weren't absolutist. They didn't believe that honesty was always the highest virtue, or that deception was always wrong. They believed in effectiveness, in results, in doing what needed to be done to achieve good outcomes. And sometimes good outcomes required lying, required trickery, required someone clever enough to see the loopholes and brave enough to exploit them. Hermes was that someone. He was the god who proved that morality is contextual, that rules are guidelines rather than absolutes, that the difference between hero and criminal is often just a matter of perspective and whose side you're on. He stole cattle and became a god. He lied constantly and became the most trusted messenger. He broke every rule and became essential to the cosmic order. That's not despite his deceptions, that's because of them. Because someone had to exist in the gray areas. Someone had to navigate the spaces where straightforward virtue couldn't reach. Someone had to be willing to get his hands dirty so everyone else could maintain their principles. Hermes guided souls to the underworld. This was maybe his most important job, the one that revealed the deepest truth about his nature. When mortals died, Hermes appeared. He led them down to the river Styx, helped them across, delivered them to Hades' kingdom. He was Psychopomp, the guide of souls, the one who facilitated the final transition from life to death. And he did it gently, professionally, without judgment or fear, because death was just another boundary to cross, another threshold to navigate, another transformation to facilitate. Hermes had no fear of death because he understood it as movement rather than ending. You were alive, then you crossed over, then you were dead. Simple, natural. Nothing to fear, just another journey requiring a guide. And Hermes guided everyone, heroes and cowards, the virtuous and the wicked, the famous and the forgotten. Death was democratic. Everyone got the same service, everyone received Hermes' guidance for that final journey. But here's where Hermes becomes truly interesting, where his character reveals depths that the trickster label doesn't fully capture. He was kind. Not always. Not consistently, but more often than you'd expect from someone defined by cunning and deception. He helped heroes regularly, gave Perseus the winged sandals that let him fly, gave Odysseus the herb that protected him from Circe's magic, warned Aeneas about dangers on his journey, helped mortals who found themselves in impossible situations, who needed divine intervention, who deserved a chance but wouldn't get it without someone powerful advocating for them. And Hermes advocated. Quietly, without demanding worship or recognition, without using his help as leverage for future obligations. He just helped because he could, because he was in a position to make a difference, because underneath the trickster exterior was someone who actually cared about underdogs, who identified with people trying to survive through cleverness rather than strength, who understood what it meant to be born with nothing and have to scheme your way to something. This kindness makes Hermes more complex than just a divine con artist, makes him someone who used his position and skills not just for personal gain, but to help others gain too. Makes him the god of the little guy, the person without power or privilege who has to use their wits to survive. Hermes never forgot that he started with nothing, never forgot that his first act was theft, because theft was the only path available to someone born without resources or status. And he extended that understanding to mortals in similar positions, helping them scheme and steal and trick their way to better lives, offering divine assistance to people who would never get help from the more respectable gods, who required virtue or heroism or noble birth as prerequisites for their attention. Hermes didn't care about your pedigree. He cared about whether you were clever, whether you were trying, whether you deserved a chance even if the system said you didn't. There's a story about Hermes and a simple shepherd that illustrates this perfectly. The shepherd was poor, struggling, trying to make a living with a small flock in difficult terrain. Hermes appeared to him disguised as a traveler, tested him with requests for hospitality, for food and shelter, despite having nothing to offer in return. The shepherd shared what little he had, didn't ask questions, didn't demand payment, just offered kindness because that's what you do for travelers. And Hermes, pleased, revealed himself, blessed the shepherd's flocks, helped them grow, made the man prosperous. Not because the shepherd was heroic or virtuous in some grand sense, but because he was decent, because he helped someone when helping cost him something, because he embodied the kind of hospitality that made travel possible, that made strangers into guests, that created networks of mutual support across geographical and social boundaries. Hermes valued that, rewarded it, protected people who understood that we're all travelers eventually, that we all need help sometimes, that kindness to strangers is sacred because you never know when you'll be the stranger needing kindness. But let's not romanticize Hermes too much, because he was still a trickster, still a god who lied and stole and manipulated, still someone who would absolutely screw you over if it served his purposes or amused him, or if you deserved it through your own foolishness or cruelty. He helped Zeus's affairs, helped his father cheat on Hera constantly, participated in the ongoing humiliation of the Queen of Heaven because that's what Zeus wanted, and Hermes was Zeus's messenger, and keeping the king happy was important. He killed Argus, the hundred-eyed giant, not because Argus was evil, but because Argus was in the way. He stole and lied and tricked throughout mythology, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for neutral ones, sometimes just because he could and it was fun. He was chaotic neutral before that phrase existed. He had his own code, his own sense of what mattered, but that code didn't always align with conventional morality or justice or fairness. And that made him dangerous in ways that more straightforward gods weren't. You knew what you'd get with Zeus: power and authority, and probably betrayal. You knew what you'd get with Athena: wisdom and strategy and rigid principles. You knew what you'd get with Ares: violence and chaos and bloodlust. But Hermes could be anything: helper or hindrance, ally or obstacle, benefactor or thief. You never knew until he decided what role he'd play in your story. And he decided based on criteria that weren't always obvious, weren't always fair, weren't always even consistent. He helped people he liked, and people he found interesting, and people who amused him, and people who seemed to deserve help. But deserving help was entirely his subjective assessment. You couldn't earn Hermes's aid through virtue or prayer or sacrifice the way you could with other gods. You just had to catch his attention and hope he decided you were worth helping. Hermes invented lying, according to some myths. On that first day when he stole Apollo's cattle and then denied it with wide, innocent eyes, he created deception as a divine art form. Before Hermes, the gods had conflicts, certainly. They fought and competed and betrayed each other, but they did it openly. They didn't lie because lying hadn't been invented yet as a divine tool. Hermes changed that, introduced the concept that words didn't have to match reality, that appearance could diverge from truth, that cleverness could create its own version of events that served your interests better than honest accounting would. And once lying existed, once Hermes proved it was possible and effective, it spread. Other gods learned, mortals learned, the whole world became a place where truth was negotiable, where what you said mattered more than what was real, where perception was reality, and reality was whatever you could convince people to believe. Hermes didn't just lie, he made lying possible for everyone else. That's a profound legacy. That's changing the fundamental nature of communication and social interaction. That's introducing a new tool into human existence that would shape civilization forever. Was that good or bad? The Greeks didn't really judge it morally. They recognized lying as a tool, like fire or the wheel or agriculture. It could be used for good or evil, for help or harm, for building or destroying. The tool itself was neutral. What mattered was how you used it. And Hermes used it brilliantly. He lied to help people, to protect them, to give them advantages they wouldn't have otherwise. He lied to advance his own interests, certainly, but he also lied to make the world more interesting, more complex, more navigable for people who couldn't rely on strength or beauty or birth to get what they needed. Lying was the great equalizer, the skill that anyone could develop regardless of physical capability or social status. And Hermes, as the god of lies, was the patron of anyone who survived through their wits rather than their circumstances. That restlessness made Hermes essential, but also exhausting. He never settled, never committed fully to anything or anyone, never gave you his complete attention because part of him was always thinking about the next thing, the next message to deliver, the next boundary to cross, the next trick to play. He was everyone's friend and no one's in the deep sense, because deep friendship requires presence and consistency. And Hermes was always moving, always transitioning, always between rather than within. He had relationships, but they were transactional, based on mutual benefit or shared amusement rather than emotional depth. He cared about people, yes, helped them, absolutely, but he couldn't stay, couldn't invest the time and vulnerability that real connection requires. He was the messenger, the guide, the facilitator, never the destination. Never the person you built your life around, always the person passing through who made things happen and then vanished, leaving you better off, but also aware that you'd never fully know him, never fully understand him, never fully trust him, even as you relied on him. There's loneliness in that existence, even if Hermes never acknowledged it. Being the intermediary means never fully belonging to either side. Being the messenger means carrying everyone else's words, but never having time to speak your own. Being the trickster means people appreciate your cleverness, but never quite trust you, never quite let you close, never quite forget that you're the person who lies and steals and manipulates. Hermes was beloved, but not loved, valued, but not cherished, essential, but not intimate. He facilitated connection for everyone else while remaining eternally apart himself. That's the cost of living in liminal spaces. You never get to settle, never get to just be. You're always performing, always adapting, always reading the room and adjusting your presentation, always on, always working, always being what people need rather than what you might want to be if anyone ever asked what you wanted instead of what you could do for them. But maybe that's exactly what Hermes wanted. Maybe being in constant motion was freedom rather than burden. Maybe never settling meant never being trapped, never being controlled, never being reduced to one role or one identity. Maybe the loneliness was acceptable because the alternative was confinement. Hermes could go anywhere, could talk to anyone, could move between Olympus and Earth and the underworld without restrictions that bound other gods to their domains. He was the only one with that kind of access, that kind of freedom. And maybe that freedom was worth any cost, worth the lack of deep relationships, worth the constant motion, worth being everyone's friend and no one's in the way that creates security and comfort.
Maybe Hermes looked at the other gods, locked in their roles and domains and feuds, trapped by their own power and status, and thought, I'm the lucky one. I'm the one who got out. I'm the one who exists outside the system, even while being essential to it. I'm the one who's free. The merchants loved Hermes, the travelers loved Hermes, the thieves loved Hermes, but most of all, the clever loved Hermes. Everyone who survived by their wits, who navigated hostile worlds through intelligence and adaptability, who understood that following rules would keep them trapped, but breaking rules cleverly could set them free, they all claimed Hermes as their patron. He was the god of anyone who'd been told they couldn't, shouldn't, weren't good enough, weren't strong enough, weren't noble enough, and responded by finding another way.
A creative way. A tricky way. A way that bent rules and exploited loopholes and transformed disadvantage into advantage. He was the god of the underdog who refuses to lose just because the game is rigged, who looks at the rigged game and says, okay, let me show you a trick you've never seen before. That legacy persists. Every con artist and entrepreneur, every salesman and negotiator, every person who talks their way out of trouble or into opportunity, they're channeling Hermes whether they know it or not. Every boundary crossed, every deal closed, every message delivered, every journey completed, every clever solution to an impossible problem, that's Hermes' domain. He's there in the gap between what is and what appears to be, in the space between honest and dishonest where most of life actually happens. In the gray areas where rules are guidelines and creativity is survival. He's the god of making it work, of finding a way, of refusing to accept that the system's rules apply to you if you're clever enough to see past them. And in a world that's always been designed to keep most people in their place, that's a form of divinity worth honoring. The winged sandals still fly through mythology, carrying their owner between worlds, across boundaries, through impossible spaces. The caduceus, Hermes' staff with two snakes wound around it, still symbolizes commerce and communication and the transformation of conflict into cooperation. The Hermes still stand at crossroads in spirit if not in stone, marking the places where decisions matter, where paths diverge, where travelers choose their direction. And Hermes still guides, still tricks, still helps and hinders situations through sheer cleverness and charm. Still proves that power comes in many forms, and sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who knows how to read it, how to work it, how to turn everyone else's certainty into his opportunity. He's the god who committed his first crime on the day he was born, and he's still committing it. Still stealing and lying and tricking his way through existence, still getting away with it, still making his victims grateful for the experience. Still proving that rules are just suggestions for people clever enough to see the loopholes and brave enough to exploit them. That's Hermes, the messenger, the trickster, the guide, the god who played everyone and somehow made them love him for it. And he's still playing, still winning, still laughing at the cosmic joke that the most honest thing about him is that he's completely dishonest. And that dishonesty, strange as it sounds, might be the most valuable gift any god ever gave.